On this week's agenda, we have monetary policy. Last week we looked at fiscal policy, and its partner in crime is monetary policy. And this is where we look at basically money and what it is and why it matters and how it's organized and managed by governments in general. So let's just think about money for a second. Money is like we all need it, we all want it. Some people are more focused on it than others. It's certainly universal, but we need it to survive in our modern societies. So, what is it? Why is it important? How does it work? These are simple questions with not so simple answers. But in order to kind of understand where money comes from, how innately human and necessary money is or currency is, it's helpful if we go back and look at a little bit of history to get some context. So if we go back to the 1600s, we're looking at some explorers as they're moving sort of beyond their familiar realm to see what they encounter. And this is a very quick summary, guys. But if we go from the ancient practice of bartering, which we know still happens today in 2020, but as a system-wide approach to exchange of goods, if we go back to barter in ancient times and move up to the current and future of cryptocurrency, there's lots of things in between. So this is obviously an incredibly quick summary, but it gives you the sense of sort of evolution of ideas. So one of the things we need to think about is sort of, yes, money has changed over time, but like, what is it and what makes money, right? Because really it's just paper and coins. A couple of things here, some concepts and context here. That money is actually considered something called legal tender. And there's a series of characteristics about it. And they are listed right there. It's generally accepted, it's portable, durable, divisible, recognizable, not easily counterfeitable, and retains its value over time. And I want you to think back at being a little kid, where money wasn't something that you understood and likely wasn't something that you were particularly aware of. And your currency was in ice cream or stuffed animals or time to do something or whatever the case may be. And what you really value at age 6, maybe a stuffed animal, was worth a lot to you, and not just sort of nostalgically or emotionally, but it was something that was one of your prized possessions. Now, at 16 and maybe at 26 or 66, that stuffed animal will still hold nostalgia for you and sentimental value. It doesn't hold the same value as things become more important when you get older, more tangible, like having a house or having a job or having a car to get to a job, et cetera, et cetera. So the currency that kids say trade baseball cards, like you can't go to the store and buy something at McDonald's with your baseball card. So we need to have these characteristics present in money so that it makes sense. Okay, and that's pretty explainable, but if we just have them listed there, it makes sense. Okay. So, if we have these questions, like if no one could ever make change for your $20 bill, or if there was a significant shift in the value of something between days, this would be very difficult. So having those characteristics provides a degree of stability. This is a quick video, it's about 2 minutes, and it kind of explains the function of money. It refers to something called fiat money, which simply means the legal tendency or legal currency, legal tender, issued by the government, okay? That's not backed by gold. So it's just so you hear that term, you have a sense of what he's talking about. This is another video, it's a little bit longer. I think it's about 7 minutes. And it also explains things. It is an American source, but a lot of what's relevant there certainly factors into the Canadian experience as well. For this week's sort of task or assignment, I did things a little differently. I included a Google form for you to fill out. And the first question on the Google form relates back to this article. And you can just click on it there and access it. It's a fascinating article, not just because I'm a history geek, but because it's just really neat. And it talks about the experience of people in prisoner of war camps in the Second World War, and how a natural currency evolved within that POW camp that had nothing to do with coins or paper bills. And it just explains the inherent humanity of currency and the need that we have to have a tool to exchange things, and that things have value. So it's a really interesting article. It's not super long, but really neat and gives you a different perspective. And the first question on the Google form is related to that article. Okay. And then we start to talk about banks. And you might think, oh, banks are boring, I don't want to talk about it. But you know what? Banks are pretty important. And one bank in particular, and that of course is the Bank of Canada, the mother of all banks. It's the biggest bank, it's the most important bank because it has 4 specific jobs. The Bank of Canada has been around since the middle of the Great Depression. And the Bank of Canada is the bank of the government, is the banker's bank. So all of the bosses of these banks bank at the Bank of Canada. It regulates currency, and it sets what's called monetary policy. So if every bank had a different dollar bill or a different loonie or a different system, it wouldn't make sense. So the Bank of Canada rather, is like the agency that governs, that sets the parameters, sets the rules, sets the boundaries of things. And it's an essential institution in the economy of Canada. So the next 4 slides just give insight into the specific 4 tasks related to the Bank of Canada. And then all of these ideas are reflected in the next 4 slides. So the Bank of Canada is divided into 4 big categories, right? It has 4 big responsibilities. And the next series of slides, each one of them reflects one of the jobs. So you have a graph in example 1, a short article in example 2, a video in 3, and a video in 4. What I want you guys to do is on the Google form, each of those 4 examples is attached to a question in the Google form where you tell me which aspect of the Bank of Canada is that particular source reflecting. And I ask you different questions in different ways, and you just explain them there right on the form. So by this point, after reading a couple of articles, watching a couple of videos, and doing a couple of having opportunities to stop and think, we've looked at the idea of money and how it evolved and how it works. Those are the slides that have green titles. The ideas of banks in general are in orange. Bank of Canada is blue. And these are essential things. Money, what it is, banks in general, the governing bank or the Bank of Canada. We have to understand all 3 of those before we can understand this concept of monetary policy. Okay, so we look at monetary policy through the film Despicable Me. Well, this video does it very well. I couldn't simplify it better. And it talks about some of the key, it's really effective looking at the big ideas of monetary policy in general. So this video explains things really well. Okay, gives you a good overview. And there's one thing that we definitely know for sure. And every history book is going to tell you this. Every older generation is going to say, it wasn't like that when I was in high school. And it doesn't mean that they walked, 30 miles uphill both ways to get to work or school, or if, a can of pop cost 12 cents when they were kids, whatever. Things change. So if we look back, if you ask your parents when they were your age, they might not have even yet had a bank card, or bank card was something relatively new. And cell phones, if they existed at all, were gigantic, cumbersome, and not particularly effective, and really limited in what they could do. Now, in a millisecond, we can transfer money around the world, and we can shoot a video on our cell phones. So things change, technology changes, society changes. You guys know that. You've taken apps. Maybe you're taking Challenge and Change. You know the world is a different place, based on technology, based on development and science and all of those things. But if you ask yourself, what is the future of money? We're likely not going to go back to trading a cow for some wheat. And many people, especially through the COVID reality, very few people are actually using cash because, of course, we want to reduce transmission of the infection. So using a bank card is typically safer, buying online. So what does that mean? What might the future of currency be? Maybe by the time that you're 25 or by the time you're 55, what is it going to look like? And it's interesting to think about. You guys are at an age where, you're moving into adulthood, and in 4 or 5 years, as you're in your 20s, you're going to be making decisions making purchases, making decisions that are a little more complicated if you are going to skip class or not, if you're going to try out for the basketball team or not, right? Things become a little more complicated as you get older. And so having an understanding or thinking about where things might go could be interesting. So the last question on the Google form is related to this video. It's a TED Talk, a really interesting TED Talk that contemplates the future of money. What might it look like? How might it be organized? And what will that mean for people? And how will things evolve? And sometimes it's hard for us to imagine. And people always say, you know, like, what would a degree in economics get you? Well, it could get you lots of things. I mean, you could focus on macro or micro or monetary policy, fiscal policy. It doesn't matter. But one aspect of economics is tied to what's called being a futurist, which is looking at trends, trying to predict trends of the future. So what might the next generation look like as far as spending patterns, money, how is it going to be organized, how are transactions going to be made, that kind of stuff. So this is a really, really interesting article that looks at the future, projects, anticipates what the future of money might be. So the last question on the Google form relates to that. The last slide here, I've just given you a couple of ideas of additional sources if you're interested. But basically, we're looking at history of money, understanding the bank, monetary policy, and where we're going. And the Google form has a question about the article about the POW, about the 4 jobs of the Bank of Canada, and then a reflection on the future of money. So really straightforward, and we'll cover, this is the last bit of new content that we'll really be exploring before we move on to the final project. And I did suggest that the final project would be presented on Monday, but I felt I was not doing the course justice if we didn't do a little bit on monetary policy. It's a huge part of economics. It's really important that we understand it. And this is a simplified version for sure, but at least it introduces you to some of those key ideas. So the final project should be posted by Wednesday. I can talk about it on Google Meet Thursday time slot, but that will be the focus for next week and beyond. Okay, so for this week, this will not take you long. It's looking at big ideas of monetary policy, which are essential for understanding how the economy is organized. So take a look through that, do what you can, fill out the form, and I'll see you at the Google Meet.